Chapter 15, Urinary Renal System, Screencast 1. Now, before I get too far into this, I want to talk a little bit about the title of this particular system. Personally, I prefer to use the term renal system, and we'll kind of look at why along the way, but I want to start off with this. When you hear the term urinary, you automatically think about just urine. You're not thinking about all of the other functions that happen because of kidney function. Many other textbooks, physiology textbooks in particular, will always refer to it as the renal system and not necessarily the urinary system. Now, one of the things that the renal system is involved in is the process of excretion. And excretion is basically removing waste and excess materials from the body. The renal system is not alone in this realm. The digestive system is responsible for the excretion of excess food and waste that are produced by the liver. The respiratory system is responsible for the excretion of carbon dioxide, which is a result of metabolic processes. The skin or integumentary system excretes water and salt. And here we look at the urinary system or renal system, primarily the kidneys, responsible for the excretion of nitrogenous waste, excess solutes, and water. But as we get deeper into this chapter, we'll see that the kidneys actually do so much more than this. Now, this particular diagram here is linking all the systems together that actually play a role in excretion. And one thing that we can kind of see here is that they do share in common is they're open to the external environment in some way. If I look at the digestive tract, we're looking at a tube open from mouth to anus. If we look at the liver, we basically see how there's connection through the circulatory system so that a lot of metabolic waste can actually be removed through the urinary system. But once again, I want us to think that excretion is a much broader term. And the kidneys and the urinary system play a small role in that. Now, one of the things that I want you to keep in mind, or a saying that I like to use when we're talking about how the kidneys or the urinary system works, is basically what goes in must go out. And that's how we maintain homeostasis. Water input must equal water output. And what the kidneys basically do, they adjust that output as necessary based on water that's coming into the body, either through fluid itself or water that is found in foods that we ingest, water that is actually produced through metabolic processes. And then we have to look at the output, and the primary output is going to be urine. So let's take a look at this overall. And so here we can see the primary sources of water input are fluids and water contained in our food. And if we look at the primary way in which we lose water, it's through our urine, and that's about 1.5 liters. Now, there are other methods or mechanisms in which we lose water. So there's an evaporative loss through the lungs, evaporative loss through the skin, a small amount of water potentially lost in our feces. But notice, they balance each other out. What goes in must come out. Now, the other thing that's being regulated by the kidneys is nitrogenous waste and other solutes. When protein is metabolized and amino acids are actually deaminated, remember, amino acids are different from other biological molecules because they contain nitrogen. That nitrogen or amino group has to be used so that carbon skeleton can be used for other things within the body. Now, initially, that amino group is converted into ammonia, which is toxic. The liver is responsible for detoxifying ammonia and converting it into urea, and urea is transported to the kidneys for disposal. Now, pretty much all other solutes are also regulated by the kidneys. So sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, hydrogen ions, and creatinine. So once again, I want you to start getting the idea of how hard the kidneys work and what they actually do. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at are the organs that actually make up the urinary system. The kidneys are the workhorse. And what we're going to see here, the kidney is subdivided into a couple of areas, and we can see that here. So in this particular diagram, we're actually seeing all of the structures that make up the urinary system. So we have the kidneys, the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra. Other than the kidneys, everything else, their role is storage or a tube for transport. So really not a lot is happening in those other structures. So hence the term renal, because the kidneys are responsible for doing pretty much everything. Here we're looking at a kidney, and we can see that the kidney is generally divided into two main regions. An innermost region, which is referred to as the medulla, and an outermost region, which is referred to as the cortex. Now we're actually looking at one of these structures here, okay, as far as a pyramid, and now we can actually see some other structures at a microscopic level. So now we're actually looking at nephrons, which we will address later. Now, as indicated before, other than the kidneys, the urinary system is made up of the ureters, which are nothing more than muscular tubes that are responsible for transporting urine from the kidneys to the bladder. The urinary bladder, which is pretty much a muscular storage sac, that is responsible for the storage of urine. Typically, the bladder can hold anywhere from half a liter to about a liter worth of fluid. And then we have the urethra, which is responsible for carrying urine from the bladder to outside the body. And specific to the urethra, we're going to find two structures known as sphincters that are responsible for the process of urination and controlling urination. Now here, we're looking at the male versus female urinary system and have to look at reproductive structures along the way. But what I want to point out in a comparison between the male versus female urinary system, the urethra in males actually serves double duty. So we're going to see urine leave the body through the urethra, but also remember we're actually going to see semen travel through the same tubular system that urine does. Whereas in women, the urethra is strictly devoted to the urinary system. There's no sexual function associated with the urethra in women.